Jack Harlan had spent most of his adult life preparing for a world that refused to end on schedule, and by the time the virus arrived, he was already living in the place he had built for exactly this moment, a modest cabin on a quiet parcel of land in rural Minnesota that appeared from the road to be nothing more than a simple one-bedroom, one-bathroom home with faded green siding, a sloped roof, and a small porch where he occasionally sat with coffee to watch the trees sway. The cabin looked ordinary, deliberately so, its exterior designed to blend into the landscape and discourage curiosity from anyone passing by on the county road. Inside, the living room was sparse but comfortable, with a worn couch, a wood stove, and a few shelves of books, and it was behind one of those shelves that the Real house began. A specific book, a weathered copy of The Hobbit, served as a handle. When pulled, the entire shelf swung open on silent hinges to reveal a spiral staircase descending into darkness. At the bottom of those stairs lay the bunker, for stories deep, engineered to sustain up to 100 people indefinitely, a self-contained world hidden beneath the ordinary surface of the earth. The first level contained 20 studio apartments, each equipped with a compact kitchenette, a bed, a small table, and basic storage. The second level offered 10 two-bedroom units for families, with slightly larger spaces and additional privacy. The third level housed communal facilities, a spacious dining hall capable of seating everyone at once, a library stocked with survival manuals, medical texts, and classic literature, a well-equipped medical bay with supplies for minor surgeries and long-term care, and a workshop for repairs and fabrication. The fourth level was the heart of the system. A vast enclosed chamber Jack had named the Eden Room. Unlike the stark concrete of the upper levels, this space had been designed to feel alive, with smooth walls painted in soft earth tones, a high flat ceiling supported by steel beams but hidden behind panels that diffused the light, and full-spectrum grow lights mounted overhead that mimicked the cycle of natural daylight. In the center stood a calm, clear lake contained within concrete banks, its water drawn from the same underground river that powered the entire facility. Tilapia and catfish glided beneath the surface, their waste filtered into nutrient solution that fed the hydroponic racks lining the walls and raised platforms, racks bursting with tomatoes, lettuce, herbs, peppers, and small fruit trees rooted in gravel beds. Separate from the Eden Room, behind sealed doors, was a livestock area. Clean, ventilated rooms with spacious enclosures for pigs, chickens, and a few cows. The animals never entered the greenhouse space. Heavy doors and independent air handling kept their areas isolated, and their manure was collected daily and composted in a dedicated chamber to enrich the soil beds without contaminating the hydroponics. The underground river provided everything else. Constant flow turned the hydroelectric generator for reliable power, and its water, filtered through multiple stages, was pure enough to drink straight from the tap. Jack had been born in 1988 to parents who were ordinary working people in a small town outside Minneapolis. His father a mechanic who spent long hours in a garage fixing cars, and his mother a school secretary who balanced budgets and answered phones. But it was his grandfather who shaped him most. His grandfather had been a Cold War veteran who built a fallout shelter in the backyard of their family home and filled it with canned goods, ammunition, and books on survival. Every summer from the age of 8, Jack stayed with him at the old farmhouse on the edge of town, learning to shoot a rifle with steady hands, to garden in neat rows, to purify water with bleach and filters, to read topographical maps, and to think about what might happen if the world ever broke. His grandfather told him stories of school drills hiding under desks, of bomb shelters in backyards, of the fear that kept people awake at night. One summer when Jack was 10, his grandfather took him into the fallout shelter at midnight during a thunderstorm and made him sit in the dark with only a flashlight to see how long he could stay calm. Jack lasted 40 minutes before he asked to leave. His grandfather said that was good enough for a start. He taught Jack how to store food for years, how to filter water, how to build a fire without matches, how to defend himself without a weapon. When Y2K came and went without incident, Jack was 16, but the lesson stayed with him. The world could change overnight, and most people would be unprepared. He started saving money from his first job mowing lawns, then from part-time work at a hardware store, then from his engineering degree at the University of Minnesota, where he studied mechanical systems and renewable energy, and spent nights in the library reading about off-grid living, hydropower, and closed-loop ecosystems. During college, he took a summer internship at a small renewable energy firm, where he worked on micro-hydro projects and learned how water flow could generate power reliably. He graduated with honors, but instead of moving to the city for a corporate job, he bought the land in rural Minnesota, a parcel with good soil, good water, and an underground river he discovered during the survey. The river was a key. It ran steady year-round, never froze, never dried up, and it could turn a turbine. Jack studied hydroelectric systems, read every book he could find on off-grid power, built scale models in his garage, and eventually hired a small crew to excavate the site, pour the concrete, and install the turbine. He did the rest himself: wiring, plumbing, ventilation, hydroponics, aquaponics, livestock enclosures. It took 7 years, most of his savings, and every weekend he had, but when it was finished, it was perfect, a self-contained world capable of sustaining life indefinitely. The cabin above was camouflage, a mask to hide the entrance and make the property appear unremarkable. The bunker was his true home, his insurance against the collapse he had always believed was coming. He lived there alone for years, tending the hydroponics, feeding the fish, caring for the livestock, walking the eating room under artificial sunlight that felt almost real. The river kept the lights on, the water flowing, the air circulating. It was quiet, self-sustaining, safe. He had prepared for the end of the world. He had never prepared for loneliness. The virus arrived quietly at first, a distant headline about a new respiratory illness in Asia with an unusually high fatality rate. Governments issued statements. Experts debated origins. Jack watched from the bunker's shortwave radio, then from the encrypted satellite feed he had installed. The numbers climbed. The symptoms were brutal: fever, rash, internal bleeding, death within days for nearly everyone infected. The mortality rate settled at 99%. Hospitals overflowed. Cities locked down. Then the power grids began to fail, and the radio went silent. Jack sealed the cabin entrance from below, pulled the bookshelf shut, and waited. Above ground, the world died. Below ground, the river kept turning. The lights stayed on. The plants grew. The fish swam. The animals lived. He walked the eating room daily, sat by the lake, listened to the hum of the generator, and tried not to think about how empty the apartments felt. Solitude became heavier than he had anticipated. The studio apartments echoed with absence. The dining hall built for 100 felt cavernous, with only one chair pulled out at the long table. He talked to the cows in their separate room, named the chickens, watched the pigs root in their pens. But it wasn't enough. Human voices were missing: laughter, arguments, life. Then one night, faint, desperate knocks came through the intercom from the outer hatch. Jack checked the cameras. A woman alone, filthy clothes torn, eyes wide with exhaustion, no weapons, no signs of fever. He opened the hatch, and she collapsed at the bottom of the stairs, gasping. "Thank God," she whispered. "I thought I was the last one." Her name was Anna, 32, a nurse from Minneapolis. She had watched the hospitals collapse, watched patients die in hallways, watched colleagues fall ill. She had left the city on foot, traveled south through back roads and woods, scavenging what she could. She found the cabin by chance. Boarded windows, overgrown yard, but a faint trail of smoke from the chimney vent. She broke in for shelter, discovered the bookshelf by luck, descended the stairs. She had been running for weeks, and she was not infected. Jack quarantined her in a studio apartment, watched her for 2 weeks. No symptoms appeared. She was clean. She was real. She brought news from above, Cities were empty. Survivors lived in small groups fighting over food and fuel. The virus had mutated, spreading through air, water, food, 99% dead, the rest dying slowly. Anna helped with the hydroponics, fed the fish, cleaned the livestock rooms. Jack taught her the generator, the water filters, the air systems. They talked late into the artificial nights, sharing stories of the old world. The bunker felt less like a shelter, more like a home. More survivors came, a family of 3. Father, mother, young boy, drawn by rumors of a safe place in the hills. Jack heard the knocks, checked the cameras, quarantined them. No symptoms. He let them stay. Tom, the father, was a mechanic with steady hands. Marisol, the mother, had a talent for organization and cooking. Lucas, their son, was curious and energetic, eager to learn. Then a group of 5 arrived, 2 couples and an elderly man who had heard whispers on the survivor networks. Jack vetted them carefully. No infections. The bunker began to fill. Studios were occupied, 2-bedroom units assigned. The dining hall echoed with voices. Children played under the grow lights. Adults tended gardens and fished the lake. The hydroponics thrived. Fish waste fed plants. Plants fed people. Livestock multiplied. The river powered everything. The bunker became self-sufficient. A hidden society growing beneath the earth. Jack watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and wonder. He had built this place for survival, prepared for isolation and hardship. But what he had created was something more. A community, a refuge where people could not just survive but live, work together, build something new from the ruins of what had been lost. The Eden Room became the heart of it all, its artificial sun warming faces, its lake providing sustenance, its gardens offering hope that life could continue even in the darkest times. The first week with Anna in the bunker changed everything for Jack in ways both practical and profound. He had grown accustomed to solitude, to the predictable rhythms of maintaining systems and tending crops alone, but her presence brought an energy and purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. Anna threw herself into learning every aspect of the bunker's operation with the focused intensity of someone who understood that knowledge meant survival. She spent mornings in the Eden Room learning the hydroponic systems, afternoons studying the water filtration process, and evenings poring over the medical texts in the library, making notes about supplies and potential treatments for illnesses that might arise. Jack found himself explaining things he had never needed to put into words before: how the river's flow rate affected power generation, why the fish-to-plant ratio in the aquaponic system had to remain balanced, how the air circulation between levels prevented carbon dioxide buildup. Anna absorbed it all, asking questions that made him think more deeply about his own designs, occasionally suggesting improvements from her medical perspective that he hadn't considered. One afternoon during her second week, as they worked together to harvest lettuce from the hydroponic racks, Anna paused and looked at Jack with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and sadness. She told him about the hospital in Minneapolis, about the night the emergency room filled beyond capacity and patients began dying in the hallways faster than the staff could move them. She described colleagues who had worked 30-hour shifts trying to save people, only to fall ill themselves days later. She spoke of the moment she realized that staying meant certain death, that the hospital had become a place where the virus spread faster than anywhere else in the city. The decision to leave had felt like abandonment, like betraying every oath she had taken as a nurse, but survival had required her to walk away from people who needed help. Jack listened without interrupting, understanding that she needed to say these things aloud, to share the weight of choices that no one should have had to make. When she finished, he simply nodded and told her that she had made the right choice, that she couldn't help anyone as she died, and that her skills were needed here now, for whatever came next. The conversation shifted something between them, transformed their relationship from reluctant host and grateful refugee into something more like partnership. It was Anna who first suggested they needed to prepare for the possibility of more survivors. She pointed out that the bunker had been designed for 100 people, but currently housed only 2, which meant they had resources to spare and a moral obligation to help others if they could do so safely. Jack's initial reaction was caution bordering on refusal. Every additional person meant more strain on supplies, more risk of disease or conflict, more variables he couldn't control. But Anna was persistent, arguing that isolation might keep them safe in the short term but would ultimately doom them to loneliness and, eventually, to the extinction of everything they were trying to preserve. She reminded him that humanity had survived as a species because people worked together, shared resources, built communities. Two people could maintain the bunker systems, but they couldn't build a future. The argument continued over several days, neither of them willing to concede entirely, until they reached a compromise. They would accept other survivors, but only after rigorous quarantine and observation, only in numbers they could sustain, and only if those survivors agreed to contribute and follow the rules Jack had established. The decision proved timely. Less than a week later, the intercom crackled with the sound of voices, multiple voices, including a child. Jack and Anna watched the monitors together as a family of three stood at the outer hatch. A man in his late 30s with grease-stained hands that spoke of manual work, a woman who held herself with the careful efficiency of someone used to managing multiple tasks simultaneously, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. The family looked exhausted but not desperate, cautious but not threatening. Jack made a decision to let them in, following the protocols he and Anna had established. The quarantine process was tense. 2 weeks during which Tom, Marisol, and Lucas remained isolated in separate studio apartments, while Jack and Anna monitored them for any signs of infection. Tom spent the time examining the bunker's mechanical systems through the cameras Jack showed him, offering observations about maintenance issues Jack hadn't noticed. Marisol organized the supplies in her apartment with methodical precision, creating inventory lists and suggesting rationing schedules. Lucas drew pictures and left them outside his door for Anna to collect, colorful images of the world he remembered from before the virus. When the quarantine period ended and the family tested clean, Tom immediately proved his worth by helping Jack repair a bearing in a hydro generator that had been making concerning noises for weeks. Tom worked with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life solving mechanical problems, and Jack found himself grateful for the assistance and the companionship. Marisol transformed the communal kitchen from a functional space Jack had barely used into an organized hub of activity, taking inventory of all stored food, creating meal plans that would stretch their supplies further, and establishing cleaning schedules that kept everything sanitary. Lucas brought something else entirely: the sound of childhood, of laughter and questions and boundless energy that reminded the adults why survival mattered. He helped feed the chickens, watched the fish in the lake with endless fascination, and asked Anna approximately 10,000 questions about how everything worked. The arrival of Tom's family shifted the bunker's atmosphere fundamentally. Meals became communal events in the dining hall, rather than solitary affairs eaten in silence. Conversations ranged from practical discussions about resource management to nostalgic stories about the world before the virus to debates about what the future might hold. Tom and Jack worked together on maintenance projects, their partnership developing into genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Anna and Marisol collaborated on inventory management and health protocols, while Lucas became everyone's unofficial morale officer, his presence a constant reminder of innocence and hope. The studio apartments no longer felt empty, but purposefully held in reserve for the next arrivals who would inevitably come. Those arrivals came sooner than expected. The elderly man appeared first, alone, walking with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had begun to fail him, but whose mind remained sharp. His name was Harold, and he had been a civil engineer before retirement. He brought knowledge of structural systems and water management that complemented Jack's expertise, and he spent his quarantine period reviewing the bunker's design to the documentation Jack provided, making suggestions for improvements and redundancies. After Harold came two couples, Younger people in their 20s and 30s who had found each other while fleeing the cities and had traveled together for safety. One couple, Michael and Jennifer, had farming backgrounds and immediately saw possibilities in the Eden Room that Jack hadn't fully explored. The other couple, David and Lisa, brought skills in teaching and communication that would prove valuable as the community continued to grow. By the end of the third week, the bunker housed 12 people, and the dynamic had shifted from Jack's isolated refuge to something more complex and alive. The dining hall filled with voices at mealtimes. The Eden Room saw constant activity as people tended the hydroponics and fished the lake. The library became a gathering place in the evenings where people read, talked, and planned for the future. Council meetings became necessary as decisions could no longer be made by Jack alone. Questions about resource allocation, work assignments, and future expansion required input from everyone who would be affected by the choices made. Not everything was harmonious. Disagreement arose about how much food to ration, whether to accept more survivors, how to handle security, and who had authority to make final decisions. Harold pushed for more aggressive expansion of the hydroponic systems. Michael and Jennifer wanted to experiment with soil-based farming in the Eden Room. David suggested establishing a formal education program for Lucas and any other children who might arrive. Each proposal had merit, but each also carried risks and required resources. Jack found himself in the unfamiliar role of mediator rather than sole decision-maker, learning to listen to perspectives he hadn't considered and to compromise on issues where he had previously been absolute. The bunker system strained under the increased population. Water usage climbed. Food production needed to increase to match consumption. The air filtration worked harder to keep up with more carbon dioxide. Jack and Tom spent long hours monitoring the generator and the river flow, ensuring that the power supply remained stable. Anna organized a health screening schedule, checking everyone regularly for signs of illness and maintaining strict hygiene protocols. Marisol managed the kitchen with increasing complexity, creating meal rotations that ensured everyone received adequate nutrition while preserving their stores for the uncertain future. One evening during a council meeting, as the group debated whether to accept a group of 5 survivors who had made contact through coded signals left near the cabin, Harold made an observation that silenced the room. He pointed out that they were no longer simply surviving. They were building something new, creating a society with its own rules and values and challenges. The bunker had become more than a refuge from a virus. It had become a test of whether humanity could maintain cooperation and community under pressure. Every decision they made, every person they accepted or turned away, every conflict they resolved or failed to resolve, would shape what kind of world they were creating underground. The responsibility was enormous, Harold said, but so was the opportunity. They could choose to rebuild with intention, to create something better than what had been lost. Jack listened to Harold's words and looked around the dining hall at the faces of people who had become more than just survivors sheltering in his bunker. They had become a community, fragile and imperfect, but real. Anna caught his eye and smiled, understanding what he was thinking. Tom nodded in agreement with Harold's assessment. Marisol already had her notebook out, making lists of what they would need to prepare for the next arrivals. Lucas sat quietly for once, seeming to understand the weight of the moment, even if he couldn't fully grasp its implications. The vote to accept a group of 5 was unanimous, and with that decision, the bunker committed itself to a path of growth and all the challenges that would come with it. Jack knew that the systems he had built would be tested in ways he hadn't anticipated, that conflict would arise he couldn't predict, that the future remained uncertain and dangerous. But as he looked at the community gathered in the dining hall, he also knew that isolation was no longer an option, and that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The bunker had been designed as a refuge for survival, but was becoming something more, a foundation for rebuilding, a place where humanity might preserve not just its existence, but its capacity for cooperation, compassion, and hope. The rhythm of life in the bunker gradually settled into a comforting, if fragile, pattern over the following weeks. Yet beneath the routines, tension simmered, a silent undercurrent that never fully dissipated. The arrival of the 5 new survivors that the council had voted to accept brought the total population to 17, pushing the bunker systems closer to their design capacity and forcing everyone to adapt to an increasingly crowded environment. Among the newcomers was Priya, a former elementary school teacher whose calm presence and natural authority with children made her invaluable. She immediately took Lucas under her wing, establishing a small classroom area in the library where she began teaching him and preparing lessons for any other children who might arrive. The other 4 newcomers brought their own skills. Carlos, a carpenter who could work wonders with the limited materials available in the workshop. Sarah, who had worked in food service and helped Marisol manage the increasingly complex kitchen operations. And 2 younger men, Ryan and Marcus, who were strong and willing but still learning how to contribute effectively to the community's specialized needs. Jack felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier with each new arrival. Every person meant more mouths to feed, more water consumed, more air to filter, more potential for conflict or disease. But companionship had brought relief from the crushing loneliness he had endured in those early weeks alone, and watching the community develop its own rhythms and relationships filled him with something he hadn't expected. Hope that they might actually survive not just as individuals, but as a functioning society. Anna embraced her role as a community's medical officer with unwavering dedication, her nurse's discipline evident in every task she performed. She meticulously monitored everyone's health, conducted regular checkups, ensured the hydroponics were free from contamination that could cause illness, and maintained strict protocols for food preparation and waste management. Her steady presence brought comfort to the bunker's residents, instilling confidence that someone was watching over their well-being with professional care and genuine compassion. The shadow of scarcity, however, was never far from anyone's mind. Tom and Jack worked together to calculate consumption rates and production capacity, running numbers late into the artificial nights to ensure they weren't depleting resources faster than the systems could replenish them. The hydroponic gardens were producing well, but 17 people consumed vegetables quickly, and any failure in the system could mean rapid depletion of their buffer supplies. The fish population in the lake was growing steadily, but harvesting too many too quickly would collapse the aquaponic cycle that fed the plants. The livestock, pigs, chickens, and cows, were multiplying, but they also required feed and space, and their waste had to be carefully managed to avoid contamination. Every element of the bunker's ecosystem was interconnected, and maintaining balance required constant vigilance and adjustment. The Eden Room, with its artificial sunrise and sunset cycles, became the heart of the community both literally and symbolically. Each morning, the golden light gradually brightened to simulate dawn, bathing the lake and gardens in warm illumination that signaled the start of another day. Breakfast had become a cherished communal ritual. Marisol's homemade bread crafted from ground wheat they had stored, eggs from the chickens, and the laughter of Lucas and the other residents echoing off the concrete walls as they shared stories and planned the day's work. Afterward, adults divided themselves into work teams based on skills and needs. Some tended the hydroponic crops, carefully monitoring nutrient levels and adjusting grow lights. Others maintained equipment, with Tom leading troubleshooting sessions on the generator and filtration systems. Several people cared for the animals in the isolated livestock areas, ensuring the pigs, chickens, and cows remained healthy and productive, and Priya worked with Lucas in the makeshift classroom, teaching, reading mathematics and science while nurturing his natural curiosity about how things worked. Yet even as routines provided structure and comfort, anxiety lingered just beneath the surface of daily life. The hydroponic gardens required constant vigilance against pests and disease. When a minor outbreak of aphids threatened the tomato plants in the third week, Anna organized a response team to isolate the affected racks and treat the infestation using methods from the agricultural texts in the library. Her medical training proved unexpectedly vital for diagnosing plant health issues, and her systematic approach to containment prevented what could have become a catastrophic crop failure. Disagreements flared under the stress of close quarters and limited resources. Tom argued forcefully for stricter rationing of water and food, worried that their current consumption rates wouldn't be sustainable if more survivors arrived. Marisol pushed back, advocating for small celebrations and occasional treats to boost morale, insisting that hope and community spirit were as vital to survival as calories and clean water. Harold sided with Tom on the technical issues, but with Marisol on the psychological ones, arguing that human beings needed more than mere physical sustenance to thrive. Jack found himself caught between competing priorities: pragmatism and compassion, security and growth, isolation and community. He called regular council meetings where everyone could voice concerns and participate in decision-making, but reaching consensus grew harder as the group expanded and perspectives diversified. Anna's calm presence often kept tempers in check during heated debates, while Priya's optimism reminded everyone of the importance of maintaining unity and shared purpose. The council structure itself evolved during this period, shifting from Jack's initial autocratic control toward a more democratic model where major decisions require majority agreement, though Jack retained final authority over issues directly related to the bunker's core systems and security. One evening, after a particularly fraught council meeting about whether to send scouts above ground to search for more supplies and survivors, Anna found Jack alone in the eating room, staring at the still waters of the lake with an expression of deep weariness. She sat beside him in companionable silence for several minutes before speaking softly. "We're doing the best we can," she said, her voice carrying both reassurance and acknowledgement of the difficulty they faced. Jack nodded slowly, his face drawn with fatigue and worry. "I planned for survival," he admitted, "but not for this. Not for people and all their complications and needs and conflicts." Anna smiled gently, understanding his struggle. "Survival is easier with people, Jack, even if it's harder too. Machines and systems are predictable. People aren't, but they're also what makes survival worthwhile." He absorbed her words, feeling some of the tension ease from his shoulders. "You're right," he said quietly. "I just wish I'd planned for hope along with everything else." Anna squeezed his hand in wordless support, and they sat together watching the artificial lights dim toward evening, finding comfort in the shared burden of leadership and the knowledge that they weren't facing these challenges alone. The next morning brought new complications when the intercom crackled to life with voices calling for help. Another group of survivors had found the hidden entrance. Caleb and his people, 6 individuals, including 2 couples and a teenage girl, all of them showing signs of weeks spent traveling through dangerous territory. Their faces were etched with desperation and exhaustion, but also with determination and hope. Anna and Jack followed the careful protocols they had established: immediate quarantine in separate studio apartments, comprehensive health checks, observation for 14 days to ensure no one carried the virus, and interviews to assess skills and compatibility with the existing community. The newcomers brought valuable capabilities. Caleb himself had farming knowledge that complemented Jack's hydroponics expertise. One of the couples included a skilled carpenter who could work with Carlos on repairs and improvements, and a teenage girl, quiet but observant, showed aptitude for the detailed work required in maintaining the hydroponic systems. But the arrivals also brought new tensions and challenges. Caleb was accustomed to leadership and decision-making, and his opinions about how the bunker should operate didn't always align with the systems Jack had established or the consensus the council had developed. Whispers of potential conflict spread through the community as people took sides or worried about maintaining the fragile harmony they had built. Tom and Jack worked together to reinforce the outer hatch entrance, installing additional locks and camera coverage to improve security in response to Caleb's warnings about raiders and dangerous groups roaming above ground. Marisol conducted another comprehensive inventory of supplies, recalculating rations for what would soon be 23 people if Caleb's group passed quarantine and chose to stay. Anna organized health checks for everyone, ensuring that the increased population density didn't create conditions for disease transmission. Priya prepared to welcome the teenage girl into her small school, recognizing that young people especially needed structure and purpose during these chaotic times. The Eden Room, once a quiet retreat where Jack had walked alone in contemplation, now buzzed with constant activity and life. Children's laughter echoed off the walls as Lucas played near the lake. Adults worked the hydroponic racks in coordinated teams, harvesting vegetables and replanting in cycles that had become second nature. The fish in the aquaponics tanks thrived, their population growing steadily to meet increased demand. Yet with each addition to community, the burden of limited resources weighed heavier on everyone's minds. Small moments of joy, a successful harvest, a child's drawing displayed in the dining hall, a shared story about the world before the virus, became precious lifelines that reminded people why they endured the hardships and restrictions of underground life. As the fourth week since Anna's arrival drew to a close, the bunker faced its first true crisis that tested everything they had built. A fire erupted in the livestock area when a heat lamp used to keep the piglets warm malfunctioned and ignited straw bedding. The blaze spread quickly in the enclosed space, threatening not just the animals but potentially the air handling systems that served the entire bunker. Smoke filled the corridors, triggering alarms and sending people rushing from their apartments in confusion and fear. Anna immediately took command, her medical training, including emergency response protocols. She organized teams with calm efficiency. One group to evacuate and contain the animals that could be saved, another fight the fire using extinguishers and water from the emergency systems, a third to manage ventilation and prevent smoke from spreading to the residential levels. Tom and Jack worked side by side to isolate the livestock area's air handling and reroute circulation through backup filters, while Carlos and Ryan broke through a wall to create emergency ventilation that would draw smoke away from occupied spaces. The community rallied with remarkable coordination born from weeks of working together and trusting each other. Marisol and Sarah shepherded Lucas and the other non-essential personnel to the Eden Room, the area furthest in the fire, while Priya kept everyone calm with quiet reassurance and organized activities to prevent panic. The firefighting team, led by Marcus and supported by several others, managed to contain the blaze before it could spread beyond the livestock area. But the damage was severe. Several pigs were lost to smoke inhalation, along with a dozen chickens. And the infrastructure of that section would require extensive repairs. The loss of animals meant reduced food production at a time when the population was growing, a stark reminder of their vulnerability and the thin margins on which survival depended. In the aftermath of the fire, grief and fear lingered throughout the bunker. People mourned the animals they had cared for daily, understanding that each loss represented not just a source of food, but a connection to the normal world where such creatures had been abundant. The acrid smell of smoke persisted for days, despite the air filtration working overtime. Children had nightmares about fires spreading through the bunker, about being trapped underground with no escape. Anna organized a memorial gathering in the Eden Room, inviting everyone to share their feelings and remember what had been lost while also acknowledging the remarkable response that had prevented catastrophe. Jack addressed the group with quiet sincerity, his words carrying the weight of hard-earned experience and genuine gratitude. "We survived because we worked together," he said, looking around at faces marked by soot and exhaustion, but also by determination. "Every person here contributed something essential. We'll rebuild the livestock area the same way, together, with everyone doing their part." The words brought some comfort, but questions lingered and worried conversations. How many more disasters could they withstand before their luck ran out, before the systems failed in ways they couldn't repair, before the community fractured under pressure? The rebuilding effort became a defining moment for the bunker society. Tom and Carlos led the reconstruction of the livestock area, designing improvements based on lessons learned from the fire. Better ventilation, redundant safety systems, fire-resistant materials scavenged from storage areas. Lucas, despite his young age, worked alongside the adults, carrying tools and materials. His presence a reminder that they were building not just for themselves, but for the future. Marisol and Sarah replanted crops in the eating room to compensate for lost food production, experimenting with faster-growing varieties that Harold suggested based on his engineering knowledge of optimal growth conditions. Anna revised all health and safety protocols, conducting training sessions on emergency response and creating detailed evacuation plans for various scenarios. Priya turned the crisis into a teaching moment, working with Lucas to understand fire safety, emergency procedures, and the importance of community cooperation in overcoming challenges. The Eden Room became a place of healing during this period, its lake and gardens serving as living symbols of resilience and perseverance. New murals appeared on the walls, painted by Lucas and the teenage girl from Caleb's group, telling stories of survival and renewal in bright colors that contrasted with the gray concrete. The artwork depicted the fire and the response, the animals lost and the community coming together, transforming tragedy into narrative that acknowledged both pain and hope. Still, concerns about food security and the fragility of their systems returned in hushed nighttime conversations. Arguments over rationing grew more frequent and intense. Some people advocated for accepting no more survivors until they had rebuilt their buffer supplies and strengthened their systems. Others insisted that turning away desperate people seeking refuge would be a betrayal of their own humanity and the principles they claimed to uphold. By the end of the 5th week since the bunker had begun filling with survivors, the community had transformed from Jack's isolated refuge into something far more complex, a fragile society bound together by shared crisis, mutual dependence, and the uncertain hope that they could build something lasting from the ruins of the old world. Bonds forged in the crisis of the fire brought people closer, creating relationships of trust and respect that transcended the initial wariness of strangers forced together by circumstance. Jack, once a solitary prepper focused purely on systems and survival, found himself surrounded by voices, opinions, conflicts, compromises, and the messy reality of human community. Council meetings continued with increasing frequency, debates ranging across resource management, security protocols, the ethics of accepting or refusing new arrivals, and a long-term vision for what they were building underground. Anna advocated for cautious expansion and outreach to other survivor groups. Tom pushed for security and system reliability above all else. Marisol argued for maintaining morale and community bonds through celebrations and shared experiences. Priya emphasized education and preparing for a future beyond mere survival. Harold brought engineering perspectives and long-term planning. Caleb, now out of quarantine and integrated into the community, pushed for more aggressive resource development and exploration of the surface world. Jack tried to balance all these competing priorities, learning that leadership in the community was fundamentally different from the autocratic control he had exercised when alone. The bunker society began developing its own traditions and rituals during these intense weeks. The memorial gathering in the Eden Room after the fire became a template for processing collective grief and challenge. Morning breakfast evolved into a time for community announcements and recognition of individual contributions. Evening gatherings in the library provided space for storytelling and connection, and the artwork on the walls grew into a visual history of their shared experience. Every voice in the council meetings was heard, every perspective considered, but reaching consensus became harder as the group expanded and diversified. Sometimes disagreements lasted deep into the artificial night, leaving people exhausted and uncertain, wondering if the fragile bonds holding them together would prove strong enough to weather the conflicts that seemed inevitable as resources tightened and challenges mounted. The future remained uncertain and dangerous, filled with questions that had no clear answers. The fire had demonstrated both their resilience and their vulnerability. The growing population meant increased capacity for work and innovation, but also increased strain on finite resources. The world above ground remained a mystery. Were conditions improving or deteriorating? Were other communities forming or collapsing? Would they eventually need to venture out, or could they sustain themselves indefinitely in their underground refuge? Jack looked around at the community that had formed his bunker and realized that these questions would be answered collectively, through the messy process of democratic decision-making and compromise rather than through his individual planning and control. It was terrifying and exhausting and utterly different from anything he had prepared for, but it was also, he had to admit, more meaningful than survival alone had ever been. 5 weeks passed after Anna's arrival. The bunker had settled into a rhythm that felt almost sustainable, a careful balance of work and rest that kept the 23 people fed, clean, and reasonably content. The hydroponic gardens were producing more vegetables than the group could consume, with tomatoes climbing the racks in heavy clusters, lettuce heads ready for harvest every few days, and herbs releasing their fragrance whenever someone brushed past planters. The fish in the lake were thriving, their numbers increasing steadily enough that Jack had started a simple rotation for catching and preserving them. While the livestock rooms remained orderly and separate, the pigs rooting contentedly in their straw, the chickens laying eggs in steady supply, the cows providing milk that Marisol turned into cheese and yogurt. The eat-in rooms grow light cycle without fail, the artificial sunlight bathing the trees and plants in a warm glow that made the underground space feel like a perpetual spring day, and the underground river continued its steady flow, turning the generator and supplying fresh, filtered water to every level. Everyone had a job and a place. Some tended the crops, some maintained equipment, some cooked in the communal kitchen, some taught the children basic reading and math using the library's books. The dining hall was no longer empty. It filled with voices at every meal, laughter over shared stories, and the occasional argument about who had eaten the last tomato or whose turn was to clean the fish filters. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. The community had learned to trust the systems Jack had built, and, more importantly, to trust each other enough to share the workload and the limited resources without constant conflict. Then the outsiders came. It began with a single knock on the outer hatch one evening, just after the lights in the eating room had dimmed to simulate dusk, and the group had gathered for their usual communal dinner in the dining hall. Jack was in the control room finishing the daily log when the audio feed picked up the sound. 3 deliberate knocks, a pause, then 3 more. The rhythm was too human, too intentional to be wind or a falling branch. Jack's pulse quickened as he switched to the external camera. A man stood alone in the clearing in front of the cabin, hands raised in a universal gesture of peace, palms open, backpack slung over one shoulder. He was thin, bearded, wearing a tattered coat that had once been good wool, and he looked like someone who had walked a very long way. No weapons were visible, no companions. He knocked again, voice hoarse through the intercom, pleading for water and food and promising to leave immediately after receiving them. Jack stared at the screen, weighing the moment. The man looked exhausted but not frantic, not the kind of desperate that turned violent. He looked like someone who had survived by moving constantly and had nothing left to lose except his life. Jack had learned to be cautious, but he had also learned that not every stranger was a threat. He activated the intercom and instructed the man to stay where he was and not move. He climbed the spiral staircase, emerged into the cabin, checked the windows, and opened the front door just enough to see him. The man stepped back, hands still raised, assuring Jack he was not armed. Jack studied him carefully. There was no fever, no rash, no signs of violence. The man gave his name as Mark Ellis from Rochester and explained he had been walking since June. Jack nodded and allowed him to enter slowly, keeping his hands visible. Mark stepped inside. Jack locked the door, pulled the bookshelf shut, and led him down the stairs. Anna met them at the bottom, her eyes wide with surprise, asking if this was another arrival. Jack confirmed it, explaining that quarantine would come first and then they would talk. They placed Mark in the same studio apartment Anna had used months earlier, and he was too tired to argue. He slept for 18 hours straight. When he woke, he ate slowly, drank water, and told his story in a quiet, measured voice that spoke of too many losses. Rochester had fallen early when the virus hit hard, and he had lost his wife, his daughter, his brother, everyone who had mattered. He had walked south, following rumors of a safe place in the hills, a hidden community with food and water. He had survived by luck and stubbornness, scavenging what he could, avoiding the sick and the desperate, moving constantly to stay ahead of the virus and the violence that followed it. He assured them he was not infected. Jack and Anna watched him for 14 days, monitoring for any sign of fever or rash or the telltale bleeding that marked the virus. No symptoms appeared. He was clean. Mark brought news from the outside that shifted the community's understanding of the world above. The virus was still killing, but some people were surviving longer. Perhaps immunity was spreading, or the virus was mutating into something less lethal. There were small settlements forming in the ruins of towns and cities, people rebuilding with whatever materials they could salvage. But there were also groups of raiders, armed and desperate, taking what they could from anyone they found. Mark had seen them, had barely escaped an encounter near the Iowa border when a group of 6 men had cornered him in an abandoned gas station. He had fled into the woods and kept moving for 3 days without stopping. The community debated what to do about Mark's presence and his warnings. Tom wanted to reinforce the entrance, add more cameras, prepare for defense in case the raiders Mark described ever found their way to the cabin. Marisol worried about the food supply, calculating how many more people they could sustain before the hydroponics and livestock reached their limits. Priya suggested helping Mark, but keeping him separate until they were absolutely sure he posed no threat. Anna advocated for compassion, reminding everyone that they had all been strangers once, all desperate for shelter and safety. Jack listened to all of them, weighing each perspective carefully, then made the decision. Mark could stay, but he would have to earn his place by working in the hydroponics, learning the systems, and helping maintain the livestock rooms. There would be no exceptions to the rules. Mark agreed without hesitation, grateful for the chance. He worked hard, learned quickly, and brought a quiet strength to the group that came from having survived alone for so long. He told stories of the outside world, of the places he had seen, and the people he had met, painting a picture of a landscape both beautiful and terrifying. The bunker felt less isolated with him there, less like a hiding place, and more like a refuge. He also brought a skill no one else had: weaving. He had learned from his grandmother how to spin cotton into thread and weave it into fabric on a simple loom, a skill he had thought useless in the modern world, but now saw as invaluable. He asked if there was any raw cotton or old clothing that could be unraveled, and the group scavenged what they could from stored supplies. Mark spent evenings in the workshop, teaching Priya and Lucas the basics of spinning and weaving, his hands moving with practiced ease as he demonstrated the rhythm of the shuttle and the tension of threads. Soon they had a small loom set up, and the first rough fabric came off it, strong enough for bandages, patches, and eventually clothing. It was slow work, but it gave everyone a sense of self-reliance they hadn't felt before, knowing they could repair or make new clothes without relying on the outside world. The skill spread quickly through the community. Priya took to it with patience, guiding the children to the motions of carding and spinning, while Lucas experimented with different patterns, creating small pieces of cloth that could be used for repairs or even traded if the need ever arose. The group began to collect scraps of cotton from old clothing and blankets stored in the supply room, unraveling threads and respinning them into usable yarn. The process became a quiet ritual in the evenings, the rhythmic sound of the loom filling the workshop, while people talked about the day's work and shared small victories. It was a reminder that they were not just surviving, but building something new, something that could last beyond the immediate crisis. Then the second group came. It was a week later, early morning, when the artificial dawn was just beginning to brighten the Eden room. The intercom buzzed again, and this time 6 people stood at the hatch. 2 men, 3 women, and a teenage girl. They stood in the clearing with hands raised, faces gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. Jack checked the cameras carefully, looking for any sign of weapons or illness. He saw neither. No guns, no signs of fever. He let them in cautiously, one at a time, directing them down the spiral staircase and into the quarantine apartments. The group was led by a man named Caleb, 40-ish with the weather hands and sun-creased face of a former farmer from Iowa. They had heard rumors of a safe place in the hills, a hidden bunker with food and water and people who had survived the virus. They had walked for weeks, following old roads and trails, avoiding raiders and the sick, sleeping in abandoned barns and empty houses. They were not infected. Jack quarantined them for the standard 14 days, monitoring them closely for any sign of illness. No symptoms appeared. They were clean. Caleb's group brought valuable skills to bunker, farming knowledge that complemented Jack's hydroponics, carpentry that could repair and improve the living quarters, sewing that allowed the community to mend and create clothing, and cooking techniques that made even the simplest meals feel special. But they also brought tension. Caleb was used to leading, used to making decisions and having them followed without question. He had opinions about how the bunker should be run, and he was not shy about sharing them. He thought the hydroponics could be expanded to double or triple production, the livestock area reorganized to accommodate more animals, and the power system improved to support additional grow lights and equipment. He spoke openly at the first council meeting after his quarantine ended, suggesting changes that would require more resources, more labor, and more risk than the community had been willing to accept before. Tom disagreed immediately, arguing that the current systems were balanced and stable, and that pushing them harder could lead to failures they couldn't afford. Marisol worried about the food supply, pointing out that they were already operating near capacity, and that adding more mouths to feed before expanding production was dangerous. Anna tried to mediate, acknowledging Caleb's ideas while urging patience and careful planning. Priya reminded everyone of the importance of unity, suggesting that any changes should be discussed thoroughly and decided collectively. Jack listened to all of them, then spoke with the quiet authority that came from having built the bunker with his own hands and kept it running through the worst of the pandemic. He explained that the community was not a democracy in the traditional sense. Decisions were made together, but the bunker was built by Jack, and the rules were his. If anyone wanted to stay, they followed them. If they wanted to change them, they had to convince the group, but they did not force it. Caleb nodded slowly, but his eyes darkened with frustration as he responded that Jack had built the bunker, yes, but they were here now. They were part of it, and they deserved a say in how it was run. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent pressure that weighed on everyone. Caleb's group worked hard in the days that followed, tending the crops and maintaining the equipment, and caring for the animals with the skill and dedication of people who understood the value of labor. But they also pushed constantly for changes, more space for the livestock, more water for the hydroponics, more power for the grow lights. They wanted to send scouts to find other survivors, to trade resources and information, to expand the community's reach beyond the hidden bunker. Jack and Anna resisted these ideas, arguing that they had enough, that they were safe, and that they didn't need more risk in their lives. One night, The argument boiled over in the dining hall after a particularly tense council meeting. Caleb stood with his voice raised, his frustration finally breaking through the careful politeness he had maintained. He argued that they couldn't hide forever, that the world was out there waiting, that they had food and water and power and the ability to help people and rebuild society. He insisted that they couldn't just sit in the bunker and wait for the virus to die out, that they had a responsibility to do more. Tom stood in response, his voice hard and unyielding as he countered that they could hide, that they had been hiding, and that they would continue to do so because this place was theirs. They had built it, and they had kept it safe. The room went silent. Everyone frozen in the moment, waiting to see what would happen next. Jack stood slowly, his presence commanding attention without effort. He told Caleb that while he had a say in the community, he did not have control. If Caleb wanted to leave, he was free to do so at any time. If he wanted to stay, he was welcome, but he would have to follow the rules with no exceptions. Caleb stared at Jack for a long moment, the weight of the decision visible in his expression, then nodded and agreed that they would follow the rules. But the tension in the bunker did not vanish. Whispers spread throughout the group, dividing loyalties, some siding with Caleb and his vision of outreach and expansion, some with Jack and his focus on security and stability. The atmosphere in the bunker grew heavy and strained, the easy camaraderie of earlier months replaced by wariness and unspoken conflict. Then the raiders came, and everything changed. It was a morning in early November when the surface cameras showed movement. 6 men armed with rifles and shotguns, moving through the woods toward the cabin with the deliberate purpose of people who knew what they were looking for. They were not survivors stumbling through the wilderness in search of help. They were raiders organized and dangerous, and they had heard rumors of a hidden bunker with food and water and people who had resources worth taking. They wanted it, and they were prepared to fight for it. Jack called an emergency meeting, his voice calm but urgent as he summoned everyone to the dining hall. The community gathered quickly, fear thick in the air as they waited to hear what was happening. Caleb spoke first, his voice steady and commanding as he argued that they needed to defend themselves, that they had weapons, knives, tools, even a few old hunting rifles stored in the supply room, and that they could fight if they had to. Tom shook his head immediately, pointing out that they had bear spray and knives and a couple of rifles that hadn't been fired in years, while the raiders had modern weapons and the experience to use them. He insisted that they couldn't fight, that they would lose, and that fighting would only get people killed. Anna spoke next, her voice calm and measured as she suggested that they could hide, that the bunker was sealed and designed to be invisible, and that the raiders couldn't get in even if they found the cabin. Priya added that they could wait the raiders out, that the raiders would leave when they found nothing of value, and moved on to easier targets. Jack listened to all of them, weighing the options and the risks, then made the decision that would define the next hours of their lives. He told them they would hide, seal the hatch, and wait in silence until the raiders left. There would be no lights, no sounds, no movement that could give them away. They did exactly as Jack ordered. The outer hatch was sealed and locked from the inside. The bookshelf in the cabin pulled shut and secured. The cameras set to passive monitoring with no active signals that could be detected. The community retreated to the lower levels, gathering in the dining hall and the eating room in tense silence, parents holding children close, and adults gripping whatever makeshift weapons they could find just in case. The raiders searched the cabin thoroughly, smashing furniture and kicking in doors and tearing through closets and drawers. They found the bookshelf and examined it closely, running their hands along the edges and trying to pry it open. They couldn't. The mechanism was too well hidden, the construction too solid. They cursed loudly, their frustration audible through the audio feeds, then finally gave up and left, moving back in the woods and disappearing from the camera views. The bunker stayed silent for hours after the raiders left, no one willing to move or speak, until Jack was absolutely certain they were gone. When he finally gave the all clear, the relief was overwhelming, but the fear lingered. The encounter left a deep mark on the community, shaking the sense of safety that had slowly built over the months. Trust was strained, and the arguments about security and defense resumed with new urgency. Caleb spoke to Jack later that evening in the control room, his voice quiet but insistent as he argued that they couldn't keep hiding forever, that the raiders would come back eventually, and that the community needed to be ready to defend itself. Jack nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of Caleb's words even as he weighed the cost of preparing for violence. He told Caleb that they would strengthen their defenses, that they would prepare, but that they would do so carefully and without losing sight of what mattered most, keeping the people inside the bunker alive and safe. The bunker continued its routines in the days that followed. The hydroponics thrived. The fish swam in the lake. The livestock multiplied in their separate rooms, and the river powered everything with its constant, reliable flow. The community grew and adapted, learning to live with the fear and the uncertainty. But the shadow of the raiders lingered, a dark reminder that the world above was not gone. It was still out there, still dangerous, and it was coming closer with every passing day. The days immediately following the raider encounter brought a shift in the bunker's atmosphere. Not fear exactly, but a heightened awareness that the world outside was closer than they had believed and more complicated than simple survival. The community continued its routines with the hydroponics thriving under the grow lights, the fish multiplying in the underground lake, and the livestock producing milk and eggs in steady supply. But there was a new sense of purpose now, a determination to become even more self-sufficient and less dependent on the stored supplies that had sustained them through the first months. It was Mark who first raised the possibility of limited contact with the outside, explaining that during his months of travel, he had encountered scroungers and traders who moved between small settlements, exchanging goods and information along routes that had begun to form in the chaos. These people were not raiders, he insisted, but survivors trying to rebuild some semblance of commerce and community in the ruins of the old world. Jack listened carefully to Mark's proposal during a council meeting in the dining hall, weighing the risks against the potential benefits of opening cautious communication with outsiders. Anna saw value in the idea from a medical perspective, suggesting that traders might have access to supplies and information that could help them treat illnesses more effectively. Tom expressed concerns about security, but acknowledged that Mark's knowledge of the trader networks could prove valuable if they approached it carefully. Marisol pointed out that they had resources worth trading: surplus vegetables from the hydroponics, cloth from the looms, and potentially other goods they could produce that other survivors desperately needed. The council agreed to a cautious experiment. They would attempt to establish contact with one of the trader groups Mark knew of, offering to trade surplus goods in exchange for items they lacked and information about the state of the world beyond their hidden valley. The contact came through a coded message that Mark left scratched into a rock at the base of a trail marker near the cabin, a method he assured them was standard among the trader networks for announcing willingness to negotiate. 3 days later, 2 scroungers appeared in the clearing near the cabin in the early afternoon, both unarmed and visibly nervous as they waited in the open space where the cameras could see them clearly. Jack watched them from the control room monitors, studying their body language for any sign of deception or hostile intent. They showed none. The man was lean and weathered, the woman younger with sharp eyes that scanned the tree constantly, and both wore layers of mismatched clothing that had been carefully repaired multiple times. Their nervousness seemed genuine, born from the uncertainty of approaching a rumored bunker and not knowing what kind of people would answer. Jack made the decision to meet them on the surface, emerging from the cabin with his hands visible and empty, keeping a safe distance but showing neither weapon nor hostility. The man introduced himself as David, the woman as Sarah, and they explained that they represented a loose network of trader groups that moved between the surviving settlements scattered across Minnesota and Iowa. They had heard rumors through the network of a hidden bunker in the hills with significant resources, and people would survive the virus intact, and they were interested in the possibility of establishing a trade relationship. The negotiation was careful and deliberate, with Jack asking detailed questions about their network, the settlements they traded with, and the current state of the world beyond the valley. Sarah explained that the virus had mutated again in recent weeks, becoming less immediately lethal but still deadly to the very young, the very old, and those with weakened immune systems. Some survivors have begun gathering in larger settlements, attempting to rebuild basic government and social structures, while others remain scattered and dangerous, forming raider bands that preyed on smaller groups. The trader networks had organized themselves for mutual protection, sharing information about dangerous areas, safe routes, and reliable trading partners. Jack agreed to a small initial trade to test the relationship. He offered 2 large bags of fresh vegetables from the hydroponics, dried fruit that Marisol had been preparing, and several bolts of cloth that Mark and Priya had woven on the small loom in the workshop. In return, David and Sarah provided salt that was becoming increasingly valuable as a preservative, dried herbs for cooking and medicine, and a hand-drawn map of the region marked with known settlements, safe routes, and areas to avoid where raiders were known to operate. The exchange felt significant, a careful step toward engagement with the world beyond the bunker, without compromising their security or revealing too much about their capabilities. As David and Sarah prepared to leave, Sarah hesitated near the cabin door and asked if the rumors were true, if the bunker really could sustain 100 people indefinitely with its own power and water and food production. Jack told her it could, but that they were selective about new arrivals and focused on maintaining stability for those already inside. She nodded with understanding, seeming to respect the need for careful boundaries, and mentioned almost casually that there was a woman in one of the western settlements who had been a food scientist before the virus, someone who had been working on ways to process grains and create preserved foods from basic crops. If the bunker ever wanted to expand their trade relationships, Sarah suggested that woman might be someone worth knowing. Jack thanked her for the information and for approaching the trade with respect rather than demands or deception. Within days of the successful trade, the bunker community was actively discussing the implications of the contact and what it might mean for their future. They had engaged with the outside world and survived the interaction, even benefited from it with useful supplies and valuable information about the state of things beyond their valley. The mood shifted subtly from defensive isolation toward cautious optimism about the possibility of careful engagement. Caleb, who had pushed for outreach before, surprised Jack by not demanding immediate expansion of the trade network, but instead seeming satisfied that they had established a foundation without overcommitting or exposing themselves to unnecessary risk. Mark began teaching others in the community the codes and symbols used by the trader networks for communication, creating a small group of people who could handle future contacts if the need arose. It was during this same period that Marisol threw herself into mastering a skill she had been contemplating since the cows began producing surplus milk. She had always been the most talented cook in the bunker, transforming basic ingredients into meals that felt like comfort and connection rather than mere sustenance. But now she became determined to learn cheese making using the fresh milk from their small herd. She found an old book in a library about traditional dairy production and studied it with the same focus she brought to managing the kitchen, asking Tom to help her build a simple cheese press from scrap materials, consulting Anne about food safety and fermentation temperatures, and enlisting Lucas to help her monitor the batches as they developed. Her first attempts were complete failures, batches where the curds and whey separated incorrectly, cheese that wouldn't set properly, flavors that were either too sharp or too bland to be palatable. But Marisol had patience born from years of cooking and a willingness to experiment until she got things right. On a Tuesday morning, barely 2 months after Anna's first arrival at the bunker, Marisol pulled her first successful batch of cheese from the press she had constructed. It was a pale, firm wheel that smelled correct, felt right in texture, and tasted like the aged cheese she remembered from before the virus. She sliced it carefully and served it at lunch with fresh bread from the oven and roasted vegetables from the hydroponic gardens, watching faces around the dining hall as people tasted it. The reaction was immediate and emotional. The simple pleasure, cheese on bread, transported them back to a world where such things were common and unremarkable. Tom asked for a second helping without speaking. Anna declared it better than anything she had tasted since the pandemic began. Jack stood and raised his glass of filtered water in a toast to Marisol, acknowledging her determination and skill in bringing something new and valuable to their community. For a moment in that dining hall, lit by artificial light, but filled with genuine warmth and appreciation, the bunker felt less like a refuge from a dying world and more like the foundation of something new and hopeful. The discovery that they could successfully produce cheese from their own livestock opened new possibilities that extended beyond their immediate needs. Marisol began producing it regularly, experimenting with different aging times and flavor additions, while the community started thinking about cheese as a trade good that could bring them resources they couldn't produce themselves. When David and Sarah returned 2 weeks later for another scheduled trade visit, they immediately noticed the cheese wheels aging in the cool storage area and asked if they could include some in exchange. Marisol showed them her work with obvious pride, and the traders marveled at the quality, explaining that good cheese was becoming rare and extremely valuable in the survivor settlements where preservation methods were limited. They offered significantly more supplies than the vegetables and cloth were worth alone, noting that many settlements would pay premium prices for quality dairy products. Jack agreed to expand the trade arrangement to include regular cheese shipments, stipulating that the bunker will provide cheese and vegetables on a monthly basis in exchange for supplies they needed and continued information about conditions in the outside world. The establishment of regular trade with David and Sarah's network marked a turning point in the bunker's relationship with a world beyond its walls. The community had proven they could survive in complete isolation, relying entirely on their own systems and resources. But now they also had evidence that they could engage carefully and selectively with outsiders without compromising security or losing their autonomy. The cheese wheels aging in the storage area became a symbol of that possibility, something created entirely from the bunker's own resources, but valued and desired by people in the larger world. Marisol's cheese-making project had accomplished more than just providing a new food source or trade good. It had demonstrated to everyone in the community that they could innovate, create value, and contribute meaningfully to the rebuilding efforts happening in the settlements without giving up the safety and stability they had worked so hard to establish. The scroungers and traders who passed through on their regular routes became familiar faces rather than potential threats. And though Jack remained appropriately cautious about how much information they revealed and how many new people they allowed inside the bunker itself, the opening of careful, controlled contact with the outside world suggested that perhaps total isolation was not the only viable path forward, that it might be possible to maintain both community security and meaningful connections with the survivors who were trying to rebuild civilization in the wreckage of the old world. The regular visits from David and Sarah's trading network evolved beyond simple exchanges of goods into something richer and more meaningful, a sharing of knowledge, skills, and stories that connected the bunker community to the wider world of survivors working to rebuild. Each time the traders arrived, they brought not just salt and herbs and supplies, but news from the settlements scattered across the region and tales of life above ground that painted a picture both sobering and hopeful. David spoke one evening in the dining hall about a settlement near what used to be Rochester, where survivors had cleared fields and planted crops using seeds salvaged from abandoned garden centers, working together to till soil that hadn't been farmed in generations. Sarah described a group in Iowa that had restored a small wind turbine and was providing power to 3 buildings, enough to run lights and basic tools that made their work easier and safer. The stories were not all triumphant. There were tales of settlements that had failed when disease struck or raiders overwhelmed their defenses, communities that had collapsed from internal conflicts or simple exhaustion. But woven through the darker narratives was a thread of persistence and ingenuity that reminded everyone listening that humanity had not given up. The knowledge exchange began informally when Sarah noticed a library on the third level during one of her visits and asked what books the bunker had collected. Jack showed her the shelves lined with survival manuals, medical texts, engineering guides, agricultural references, and classic literature, along with a small server room where he had stored thousands of ebooks on portable drives before the grid failed. Everything from technical manuals to historical tech to novels and poetry. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized the scope of the collection, and she asked if the bunker would be willing to share copies of the technical and practical books with the settlements. The knowledge contained in those texts could help communities solve problems they were facing, she explained, from water purification to basic medicine to sustainable farming techniques. Jack agreed immediately, recognizing that sharing knowledge cost him nothing and could strengthen the entire network of survivors. Within days, Tom had rigged a simple system for copying ebook files to portable drives that the traders could carry, and Mark began cataloging which texts would be most useful for different settlements based on their specific needs and challenges. The skill sharing flowed in both directions as the traders became regular visitors and the bunker community grew more comfortable with the relationship. David taught several of the bunker residents how to tan leather using a simple process he had learned from an elderly survivor in one of the western settlements, showing them how to preserve hides from the pigs and cows to create durable material for clothing, bags, and repairs. The process was labor-intensive and required patience, but opened up new possibilities for using every part of the animals they raised. Sarah brought seeds on one visit, varieties that grew well in the harsh conditions above ground, and spent an afternoon with Anna and Priya, discussing which ones might adapt to the hydroponic systems and which would be worth trying in small soil beds if they ever expanded. In exchange, Mark taught the traders the weaving techniques he had brought to the bunker, demonstrating the loom and the process of spinning thread, while Marisol shared her cheese-making methods in detail, walking them through each step from milk collection to aging, so that other settlements might be able to produce their own dairy products if they had livestock. One of the most valuable exchanges came when a third trader arrived with David and Sarah on their next visit. An older woman named Ruth, who had been a librarian before the virus and now traveled between settlements organizing knowledge and teaching literacy to children who had missed critical education. She spent 2 days in the bunker going through the ebook collection with Priya, helping to organize and categorize the texts so they could be more easily shared with settlements that needed specific information. Ruth explained that several settlements were establishing small schools, trying to ensure that the children growing up in this new world would have access to reading, mathematics, science, and history. The bunker's collection could supply textbooks and reference materials that were otherwise impossible to find. Priya and Ruth worked together to create educational packages, sets of ebooks organized by subject and grade level, that could be distributed to the settlement schools. In return, Ruth taught Priya and the other adults in the bunker new teaching methods she had developed for working with children who had experienced trauma and disruption, techniques that would help them support Lucas and the other young people in the community as they processed everything they had witnessed and lost. The evening gatherings in the dining hall took on a new character as the traders became familiar faces and trusted partners. David told stories of settlement that had restored a small hydroelectric dam, similar to the bunker's river system but on a larger scale, providing power to nearly 200 people. Sarah described a community that had established a mobile medical clinic, traveling between settlements to provide basic health care and training local residents in first aid and disease prevention. The traders asked questions about the bunker systems, how the hydroponics worked, how the aquaponic cycle sustained itself, how the river generator had been designed and installed. And Jack found himself teaching evening sessions on sustainable engineering, sharing knowledge that could help other communities build similar systems if they had the resources and the right conditions. Anna organized medical workshops where she taught basic nursing skills to anyone interested, including several of the traders who wanted to take that knowledge back to their settlements where trained medical personnel were desperately scarce. It was during one of these evening gatherings, barely 2 weeks after the traders had become regular visitors, as the community sat together in the warm glow of the eating room's grow lights after a shared meal, that Emily and Robert made their announcement. They were one of the younger couples who had arrived with Caleb's group, quiet and hard-working people who had integrated smoothly into the community without drawing much attention. Emily stood with Robert's hand in hers, her face flushed with emotion and excitement, and told the gathered group that they were expecting a baby, the first child to be conceived in the bunker since the community had formed. The news hit like a wave of pure joy, sweeping to the dining hall and bringing people to their feet with cheers and embraces. Marisol cried openly, pulling Emily into a hug and immediately beginning to plan how they would prepare for the baby's arrival. Anna started mentally cataloging the medical supplies they had and what they would need, already making notes about prenatal care and delivery preparations. Priya talked about setting up a nursery in one of the unused studio apartments, decorating it to be warm and welcoming. Even Jack, normally reserved and practical, felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears as he realized what this meant. New life, not just survival but growth, the continuation of humanity in a place he had built to weather the end of the world. The pregnancy became a focal point for hope and planning in the days that followed. The traders brought supplies from the settlements on their very next visit. Cloth for baby clothes, books on childbirth and infant care, even a handmade cradle that a carpenter in one of the communities had crafted specifically as a gift when he heard the news. The gesture moved everyone in the bunker, a reminder that they were not alone but part of a larger network of people who cared about each other's survival and well-being. Anna worked with Emily immediately to begin monitoring the pregnancy carefully, grateful for the medical texts in the library and the e-book collection that provided detailed information on prenatal care and potential complications. The community rallied around the expecting couple, making sure Emily had the best food from the gardens, the most comfortable spaces to rest, and constant support and encouragement. The presence of new life growing in the bunker shifted something fundamental in the community's perspective within just days of the announcement. They had survived the virus, built a functioning society underground, and established connections with the world beyond their walls. But the baby represented something more, a future, a reason to keep building and improving, a symbol that life would continue despite everything they had lost. The Eden room took on new meaning as people imagined a child playing under the artificial sunlight, learning to walk among the trees and plants, growing up in a world that was different from the one that had been destroyed, but filled with possibility nonetheless. The livestock and fishing gardens were no longer just systems for survival, but resources that would feed the next generation. The library and e-book collection became an inheritance, knowledge that would be passed down to children, who would rebuild a world with lessons learned from both the past and the present. As the weeks progressed and the bunker settled into its new reality, the trade network continued to develop with new settlements joining and the exchange of goods and knowledge becoming more sophisticated and reliable. The bunker's cheese and vegetables became valued commodities, while the e-book library became a resource that settlements across the region relied upon for everything from medical information to engineering guides to stories and poetry that reminded people of their humanity. Jack watched it all unfold from his position as the bunker's founder and guardian, amazed at how far they had come in just a few short months from those early days of solitude and fear. The community had grown beyond anything he had imagined when he built the bunker, not just in numbers but in purpose and connection. The transformation of the bunker from isolated refuge to connected community hub happened faster than anyone had anticipated. Within weeks of establishing the trade network, the bunker had become a reference point for other settlements, a place where knowledge could be accessed, where skills could be learned, where people could find guidance and support. Ruth returned twice more in those early weeks, each time bringing news of settlements that had used the e-book collection to solve critical problems. a community that had purified their water supply using techniques from the engineering manuals, another that had prevented an outbreak of dysentery by following the medical protocols Anna had shared, a third that had successfully preserved their harvest using food storage methods from the survival guides. Each success story reinforced the value of what the bunker was doing, not just for themselves, but for the entire network of survivors trying to rebuild. The children in the bunker, particularly Lucas, thrived in this new environment of learning and teaching. Lucas had become Ruth's assistant during her visits, helping her organize the ebook files and learning the systems she used to catalog and distribute knowledge. Priya noticed a change in him, more confident, more purposeful, excited about the role he could play in helping other children access education. He talked about visiting the settlements one day to help set up schools, about teaching other kids what he had learned in the bunker. The future that had seemed so uncertain just weeks ago now felt full of possibility and purpose. The evening before the trader's most recent departure, the entire community gathered in the eating room for what had become a tradition, a shared meal followed by stories and songs. David brought out a harmonica he had carried through his months of travel and played old songs that everyone recognized, melodies that connected them to the world that had been lost, but also reminded them of what endured. Sarah taught the group a call and response song that the settlements used for celebrations, and soon the eating room echoed with voices harmonizing under the artificial sun. Emily and Robert sat at the center of the gathering, hands clasped together, surrounded by a community that had become family in the truest sense. Jack sat by the lake in the eating room later that evening, watching Emily rest with Robert beside her while the community gathered around them in quiet conversation, and realized that they had prepared for survival, but had been given something far more valuable, a chance to be part of the rebuilding, to contribute to continuation of humanity, to see hope literally taking root and growing the refuge he had built beneath the earth. The river kept turning the generator. The lights stayed on. The plants grew. The fish swam. The livestock multiplied. And in the center of it all, new life was beginning. The bunker had become more than a shelter from the end of the world. It had become a foundation for a new beginning, a place where knowledge was shared freely, where skills were taught and learned, where communities supported each other across distances, and where the future was no longer something to fear, but something to nurture and protect. The world above remained dangerous and uncertain, but the world below had found its purpose, not just to survive, but to preserve what was best about humanity and pass it forward to the next generation.